Hello, family. Welcome back to Landline, your direct link to all things politics, comedy, and culture. I'm your host, Janaya Future Khan, champ yapper and frequent nuisance in the activist and comedy worlds. Let's get dialed in. So, in this episode, we are jumping into two major things: Netanyahu in Congress and Sonya Massey. I am furious about both of these things for different reasons. And I think while I'm speaking and while we're talking and thinking, just try to keep in mind how connected these issues are, because they seem like they're so far removed, but they're actually not. So for those of you not in the know, Benjamin Netanyahu, right, of Israel, came to Congress and made this big, ridiculous speech that basically condemned, I don't know, every protester in the world. He did not mention the fact that 39,000 or more Gazans and Palestinians have been murdered in the last 9 months. That was not acknowledged. When he walked in to the Senate, he was greeted with an unbelievable amount of applause by many members of Congress. It was one of the most disgusting displays of brutalism I've ever seen. And I'm still trying to wrap my head around this, because I am a history nerd, like I know at least two of you are who are listening to this. And I'm just trying to like wrap my head around how backwards this is. Like right now, you know, and you might have heard in other episodes, we have this thing where it's like Israel, America, and England versus Iran, Russia, and China. And one of the things that America loves to use as its story of freedom is what role it played in World War II, right? Where Hitler annihilated 6 million Jewish people. And it is incredible to me that because America loves to take responsibility for this and say, see, we showed up here and we showed up there, but actually World War II was won largely by Russia. I looked into it because I realized a lot of Russians were really upset about this. This is one of their core issues with the United States. Not in a arms, military, foreign policy kind of way, in a cultural kind of way. And when I realized that, I was like, oh, part of this cultural feud is that America was like, we did this. And when you ask the average American, and these are polls done, who was responsible for saving people and ending World War II? And they often say, America, America, America. And in this particular moment, I'm just watching this, I'm trying to think of this in a historical context where I'm like, America versus Russia, Israel versus Russia, and of course also, America and Israel versus Iran. And it's just like, what is happening? We're talking about a population of people, Jewish people, who have been persecuted, abused, brutalized throughout history. And now we're in a moment where we have Israel, which is a Jewish state that is brutalizing, torturing, and annihilating Palestinian people. And America is bankrolling that. That's the moment that we're in, and it's almost too much to hold. I hardly know how to wrap my mind around 39 to 40,000 people, and that's an underestimate. And nothing has changed. Millions of people have protested around the world. Millions of people are still protesting around the world. Right there in Washington, D.C., where everybody was gathered in the Senate clapping for Netanyahu, there were hundreds, if not thousands, of people protesting outside of the Senate, getting beaten up by cops. Students are still trying to wrap their minds around what their futures look like if they've been expelled from school. They're coming out in debt, coming out not being able to receive the education they deserve. In this America, you are punished for being anti-war. And if you look at the history of America, you have been punished for being anti-war. So there's Netanyahu, and this is the thing that's very important for us in this particular moment, right? The fact that this fight is far from over, But one of the things Netanyahu does, yes, he condemns the protesters. I mean, what did we expect from that? But he went out of his way to praise Donald Trump. He went out of his way to praise Donald Trump because remember I was talking about how ass backwards this whole situation is? Netanyahu and Putin and every other weird, hyper-fascistic, authoritarian government in the world is deeply invested in Trump winning this election. So what he specifically did was Netanyahu used his address to praise Donald Trump. He said he wanted to thank the former president for his leadership in brokering the historic Abraham Accords. He thanks Trump for, quote, recognizing Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights, for confronting Iran's aggression, and for recognizing Jerusalem as our capital and moving the American embassy there. Do you remember in a couple episodes back, I referenced how important it was to understand the dangers of Trump to the Palestinian freedom struggle and how Trump went above and beyond to affirm Israel's straight up criminal acquiring of lands through brutalism and genocidal agendas. I mean, the ICJ has called Netanyahu a war criminal. And when he walked in, again, he walked into thunderous applause from our Congress. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? You know, Tlaib was there, and she was holding up a sign. You know, this is a Palestinian sitting Congress member who's holding up a sign that said war criminal. Those are her people, but they're also our people because they're fucking people. And I'm so sick and tired of us trying to like bend over to be like, well, this wouldn't have happened if they hadn't done that. Or maybe if I don't really care where you started out in this thing. If you can't see by now that there is no war that exists, there's just one nation state deciding that another one should not exist simply because it can. And again, America is bankrolling that. They have every fascistic government in the world stands to benefit from Trump winning office again because they get to see through whatever they want. Every technocrat and multi-billionaire out there has a deep and vested interest in seeing Trump win. So I'm not interested in saying we've got to vote because this and it's blue no matter who. It's not about that. It's do everything you can to mess up these particular plans that are deeply invested in our annihilation. And it starts first and foremost with the Palestinian people. Because once Israel has, I don't even know the words to use. I'll just say this. I'll use his words. Netanyahu called on Congress to give him enough weapons to, quote, finish the job. Finish the job. What a monster. What a disgusting human being. To finish the job, I want us to be really clear about what the job is in this case. It's not Hamas. Right? We talked about that. We talked about the fact that there's a reason why, despite months and months and months of coverage, no one that I know who is even a modestly informed person can tell me the name of a single member of Hamas or tell me what they look like. It's not because they don't exist. It's simply because there's a vested interest in us believing that any Palestinian could have been Hamas. Therefore, you can always bomb schools and you can bomb hospitals. When he says finish the job, he means erasing Palestinian people out of their lands and out of Israel. Because his goal is to expand Israel to the point that Palestine and Palestinians no longer exist. If we are not clear about that now, I don't know what we've been doing. I don't know if we comprehend. I don't know if we're picking up what they're putting down. It's very clear at this point. There are thousands of Israelis who are fighting against Netanyahu every day because he's pushing an authoritarian government in Israel. He ensured that the Supreme Court could not get in his way. Trump, on the other hand, bought the Supreme Court. So our fights are very, very similar. But the entry point into them are very different. if we're at a stage across the left that we can't agree that this is a genocide, that we can't agree that the Knesset and the current Israeli government wants to see through, right? And it might not be every sitting member. I'm not interested in that. It's the current government in power, that they have the means to see through the annihilation of the Palestinian people. You are not a leftist. If at this point we can't be clear on that, and that's fine. That's fine if you're not. But I don't know if you know that. If we're still equivocating 9 months in after the death of 40,000 people, and that's just in this stage, I don't know what books you've been reading. I don't know what books I've been reading, but we're not seeing the same reality. I'm really struggling to grasp the fact that a literal war criminal, I don't even like these terms. It sounds cartoonish. Just walked up in Congress and people are clapping. I'm like, wow. And I'm not going to do the really hack thing of being like, it's like Hitler. It's like if Hitler walked in the... I'm not interested in that, particularly with the weird historical connotations. But I will say, would you put Dahmer in a hospital to work with people, to work with men? Would you have him in a YWCA or YMCA rather? Would you put somebody that you know is a murderous, monstrous piece of shit in a place of power or where they could harm people? No. But unfortunately, we don't seem to do this. We don't have the same kinds of barometers when it comes to governments. And I think we're getting fed up with that. I'm so disgusted at America right now. I mean, and granted, I low-key am in small doses or large doses every day. But this is something else. And we have this moment with Kamala Harris, okay? Yes, she's more or less consolidated this whole base of people. She's more or less secured the nomination, but she hasn't won over the people yet. Let's tell her what the F she needs to do, because she has been far more critical of Israel. And honestly, if there's even the smallest opening, the smallest chance that we could break ties with Israel in some way, let's go for it. Let's just put so much pressure on it that maybe they don't even decide. It just breaks. I finish the job. I have spent a lot of time reading the reports and listening to the words of doctors who came from Doctors Without Borders, who are working over there in Palestine, and can tell you they have no skin in the game. They're not from a political faction that Israeli snipers were just killing preteens for no reason, who were just playing outside on the street. And they got to the point where they could tell it was the same shooters and the same snipers, because it was always preteens and always when they were playing outside, and it was always a headshot. It was always a headshot. Currently Netanyahu is violating the ICJ's legally binding orders to halt all acts of genocide in Gaza. And this is who members of Congress applauded. This is who they're clapping for. Here's one of the most fascinating things. This is while Palestinians in Gaza have nowhere to go, where people are starving. Humanitarian camps have been bombed. Israel has told Palestinians, this is where you go to be safe, and then bombed those camps, bombed those encampments, bombed those safety zones. Netanyahu says, right, this is Israel's leader, this is their current king. He proclaimed the campaign against Hamas in Gaza part of the broader fight against barbarism. Imagine somebody capable of... This is the thing. The people who are doing the most evil, vile, disgusting shit will always accuse you of doing it first. That is media propaganda 101, right? You've all had that little weird girl-interrupted friend that was just gaslighting you every moment of the day. Every time you were like, hey, maybe could we just... and was telling you were doing the things that they, in fact, were doing. It's because they know, right? And honestly... Israel's media propaganda campaign has just, at this point, failed miserably. Gen Z cut right through it. Millennials cut right through it. But we still have yet to cut through the fabric that ties America to Israel, and until we do that, Palestinian lives are in danger. Palestinian people are in danger. So I'm down for us doing whatever we got to do at this point, because I'm so disgusted. I'll be more articulate, but I was like, let me bring this because it's the most honest thing that I can. And it's not that I believe that there's a bar that America can't get below, where the limbo's in hell at this point. It's more that we have to make sure that feeling this disgust isn't something that you lose. It's so important not to lose that, because that's the whole point. That's the whole point of living in this system that we do, is that we suddenly lose sight of these things. It's too hard. It's too much to endure. No, it's not. It's what being human is. One of the medical team leaders told the Post, I pulled the curtain back and there was just a small girl alone dying. This is he said this in a phone call this week from Gaza. His name's Javid Abdelmonem. In a system where there were staff and supplies, and she was the one trauma case, we could have saved her, he added, but they couldn't. She looked like she was 8. This is one of thousands of stories that happen every single day, that even a non-fatal injury will lead to a fatality in Palestine, and that's the point. That's the point. In his address, he also said that any protester across the United States, in the United States, he chided our participation and called us useful idiots, that's a direct quote, and anti-Semites. I gotta tell you something. I hate this man. like, I hate this. He is so dangerous for Jewish people everywhere in the world because of how he's conflated criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism, which is a very, very real thing. But you know what's equally dangerous? Islamophobia. And that's the thing that I'm not seeing get enough airtime in our leftist movements. This is like we're back in the post 9/11 era, right? Where anybody who is brown is now can be attacked on the streets. We were doing this in COVID, where Asian people couldn't just be living their lives. This place in a race-based society, a guy like Netanyahu knows exactly how to rage bait and race bait, and he came to America to do that. Imagine that some piece of shit, some weird fascistic loser comes to America, the so-called greatest country in the world, and then insults Americans, right? While an Israel-backed lobby gets to decide who's in an American Congress. Have we gotten so far to the right that I'm now a fucking patriot? I feel gross because I'm just like, why is a foreign entity, listen to how wild I'm talking right now. A foreign entity is influencing American Congress and American politics. I'm okay with that if it means that we're actually like growing but this is something else. This is a deep, insidious, ugly kind of hatred and Islamophobia, and I'm so sick and tired of watching that march right through Congress, march all up through the White House, and everyone's just like, it's cool. Like, it's cool. We're okay with hatred as long as it's against Muslims. Not Jewish people. Well, Jewish people, if it's a certain kind of white supremacist, then it's like, then we're kind of okay with it if they're going to vote for the right side. If they're going to vote literally for the right side, then we're cool with it. I'm like this. I'm looking forward to our response to this because I think it's going to be pretty ferocious. Just remember this: if you're like, what's going to happen next? Just remember that revolutions and uprisings happen in cycles. Okay, so every time that there's mass mobilization, which we've just seen, there's some time that goes by while people regroup, incubate, replan, and then come back up and go right back to it. One thing that we've seen is that folks here are steady and steadfast, and as long as we keep talking about it and as long as we keep showing up, we're going to make sure that Palestinians are not standing alone. And that's key right now because clearly America is standing behind Netanyahu. And I want to be very clear about that. They're standing behind Netanyahu, not in front, not leading. Not the greatest country, standing behind Netanyahu because they have no means of reining him in whatsoever. He could just come here and say and do whatever he wants, and it's totally fine. I can't even deal with that. Let me just move on to this next thing because this is a more somber episode for sure, but we would not be who we are if we don't talk about what's actually happening and what is important right now. And I'm going to talk to you about Sonya Massey, a 36-year-old black woman, mother of two, okay, from Illinois. On July 6th, she called the police, right? So July 6th, she calls the police. She says, I think that there's a prowler outside my house, okay? So she reported this a suspected prowler, and the police came. They asked her a couple questions. They asked her for ID. One police officer proceeded to go around the house. The other went inside with her. The police officer who went inside with her is named Grayson. So for a couple of minutes, it was fine. Grayson did not have his body camera on, right? The cop who came in had a body camera on. So he comes back in, and this is the back and forth that happened. So for a while, the officers interrogated Sonya. They asked for her ID. They noticed a pot of boiling water on the stove, and then they prompted her to stand and move to the kitchen to turn off the heat. This is the conversation. So we don't need a fire while we're here, one deputy says. None of them had any problem, right, with her walking over to get the pot. When she grabbed the pot of boiling water that they instructed her to get, the police officer started to move away from her. She asked them, where are you going? One officer says, away from your hot steaming water, right? And she says, I rebuke you in the name of Jesus, right? She's responding to their very exaggerated fear. The deputy says, huh? She says, I rebuke you in the name of Jesus, she repeats. Grayson then says, you better fucking not, or I swear to God, I'll fucking shoot you in the fucking face. This is what he said to her. I can't believe I'm saying this. That's exactly what he did. He shot her in the face 3 times. The footage, which is now out in the public, shows that when she said that, she went, after he threatened her, she went and poured the water in the sink and ducked down behind the counter, right? So she covered her face with what appears to be a red oven mitt. She briefly rose, and in that time, that's when he shot her in the face 3 times. So they tell her to go empty the pot, right? Turn it off, empty the pot. She says, I rebuke you in the name of Jesus. That's it. That's what she said. He said, you better fucking not. You better not fucking. She goes and she dumps the water. I want to be clear. She dumps the water out, puts the pot down, ducks down for a second, picks up a mitt, and is then at that point shot 3 times in the face. So there was no water in her hand. There was no pot. She was also a far enough distance from the officers that she didn't pose any imminent threat or danger. Not to mention the fact that these are 2 big-ass men in the middle of the night, that she called for help. She called the police for help, and then they murdered her. I don't care what you believe this issue is, whether you think it's race-related, which it is. Whether you think that this has to do with the cop fearing for his life, which he did not. This person had no business being a police officer, and the entire system of policing looks at any black person that breathes as a threat. A 36-year-old mother of 2 gets murdered in cold blood in her home because she called the police for help. I can't imagine that there's anyone in the world who believes that somebody deserves to die that way. This is a black woman Why aren't we seeing the hashtags? Why aren't we seeing this big, massive movement? It's harder for us to think of a black woman as somebody that we should galvanize around, that we should support. And so it's important that we speak to these names, but it's like, I, after having done this work for years, and if you know me, you know that this is the work that is near and dear and true to me. And, you know, I've seen through Black Lives Matter and all the campaigns that we did to try to at least shift some of the resources that go to police into alternative measures. Because once I tell you what I'm about to tell you, not only will you be incensed at the fact that a woman died for a mother died for absolutely no reason, you will be incensed at the fact that this person was an officer at all. So let me tell you a little bit about this police officer. This is a man who has had 6 different jobs in a policing capacity in 4 years. So there's a high turnover rate with him. He's had 2 DUIs. And the thing is, here's the thing. He didn't activate his body camera until after he shot her, according to the documents, right? The other deputy, which is how we have the information, is the one who did. After he murdered her in cold blood, Grayson tells his partner that she would not need medical help immediately after the shooting. What I'm about to tell you is horrendous. Brace yourself. The other officer there bent down and said, "She's gurgling a little bit. She's still breathing." And then Grayson responds, "Nah, she's done. You can go get medical." He says, "Go get it." He's talking about medical care. "You can go get it, but that's a headshot." Afterwards, when he walks outside and there is a slew of police officers there, and let me tell you something. Any police department is the biggest gang you'll ever see in the world, but I'm going to tell you something you should have seen. I was stunned at the way that these officers were staring at this man who had just murdered a woman in cold blood. He said, seeing this reaction, said, "She's a crazy bitch. She's a crazy bitch. She was threatening me with boiling water." Here's my thoughts on this. If the police officers who had known him for the last 2 years, because he'd worked in that specific department for 2 years, they didn't look shocked. They didn't look stunned. They hardly looked disgusted. Something tells me that incidents like this with this individual had occurred before, but they swept it under the rug. I'm reminded of a story a long time ago, and we've just touched upon Islamophobia, so hear me well. When I remember a couple years ago reading, it's actually a few years ago now. It was in London after bombs went off in Paris and Muslims were blamed for it. And a Muslim woman was pushed into an oncoming train, right? And she was pushed because she was Muslim. And of course there was outrage and there was disgust. But I thought to myself, how many times had that person said something Islamophobic without interruption? How many times had he posted something? How many times did that person indicate that that's exactly where they're headed? Because nobody wakes up and decides that they're going to kill a Muslim woman today. That's years in the making. This police officer was years in the making. The particular way that he felt about black people, his particular knack for violence, ineptitude, ignorance, whatever you want to call it, was very apparent. Just look at his high turnover rate. Just look at his multiple DUIs. How did he become an officer in the first place? Because whether or not you agree that there's some massive police brutality issue in the country, which there is, and whether or not that police brutality issue is super infused with massively racist realities, which it is, you've got to ask yourself, how did this particular person become a police officer in the first place? 2 DUIs. Is that somebody that you would trust coming into your home for your very specific family matters, for your crises, when you're afraid? So get this. He pleaded not guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder. He was fired, for the record. Right? So he pleaded not guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder, aggravated battery with a firearm, and official misconduct in Sonya's death. The Illinois Law Enforcement Training and Standards Board, so the records show that Grayson, who's 30, worked 3 full-time jobs and 3 part-time jobs in 4 police departments and 2 sheriff's offices over the past 4 years, all within the state of Illinois. Grayson was employed at 3 different police departments in 2021 alone, the records show. His shortest term of employment was with the Kincaid Police Department, where he was employed for just over 3 months. Records list his reason for leaving as, and I quote, other, which to me I think is a code, obviously. So he was indicted by a grand jury last week on 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count each of aggravated battery with a firearm and official misconduct in connection with Sonya's murder on July 6th. It is important to note that police officers are very, very rarely convicted. And even still, there's only one kind of justice in this world, and that's life. It's life and it's quality of life. And so anytime that we are talking about justice after somebody's life has been taken, we're always talking about it on the back foot. We're always talking about it in a way that is cosmically imbalanced. This is what Sonya's father, James Wilburn, says. So I want to be clear, not only was she murdered in her home when she called police officers for help, not only was she left to die and then insulted seconds afterwards, her father was under the impression that the prowler, the prowler that incited this call, had broken in and killed his daughter. He said, never did they say, they being the police officers, never did they say that it was a deputy-involved shooting until my brother read it on the internet. Sonya Massey's father did not know that she had been murdered by police until his brother read it on the internet. They had him believe that it was a prowler who snuck in. So I want to be clear about this. The swift firing of Grayson, the swift response by these police boards, this is because of how indicting and damning and clear and how quickly that evidence got out there. Had they been left to their own accord, their own devices, this would not have been the story that we would have got. This was not the story that her father got. So think about this as we assist her father in his fight for justice. He's currently trying to remove the chief deputy of the sheriff's department. He wants some kind of justice because this was an oversight that was years and years and years in the making. And we know that the racism embedded in the practice of policing in America is generations and centuries in the making. This has got to change. And you want to know exactly what I mean when I say it's years and it's centuries in the making. I couldn't believe my eyes when I read this. This happened just a couple hundred miles outside of Springfield. Springfield has a troubling legacy of racial violence. This is from a Guardian report. Sonya Massey passed away at the same hospital where her ancestor William Donegan died. Donegan was lynched during the 1908 Springfield race riot. And it's that event that spurred the formation of the NAACP. That's what we mean when we say legacies of racism. Those people who were originally slave catchers and lynchmen, those became police officers. Read the new Jim Crow. When we talk about things like the criminal justice system, see how it cannot exist without racism. That America's wealth couldn't exist without enslavement, without racism. And that so many of the systems that we rely on today hinge upon the continuance of racism because it's a money business. Racism ensures that economic power stays in the hands it's meant to. Police do not exist to keep people safe as their primary goal. And I'm not interested in debating the merits of single officers. The system of policing exists for the protection of property first and foremost, and then people second. And how important those people are, well, that depends on your gradation and your proximity to a certain subset of people. And I want to be very clear about something. They don't like poor people. They don't like poor people. They don't like trans people, disabled people. And this is not about individual officers. This is about what that indoctrination teaches them and then gives them a badge and a gun and immunity and says, go out there in the world and do it. This was a man who had so many problems and that it was so obvious and so clear that he was absolutely violent and dangerous and inept. But in the state of Illinois and in the country that is America, that is a fine officer. That is a person that could go and work at just about anywhere as a police officer in this country. Think about Darren Wilson, who killed 18-year-old Mike Brown. All you have to do, if you're a cop, you know what other place shuffles around cops who kill people? You know other place shuffles around weirdos and brutalists and abusers? The Catholic Church. Just put them in a different state, put them in a different city. Same robes, though, and let them abuse somewhere else. It's awful that we talk about a state that is corrupt and disgusting. Let's go zoom out for a second. To say that these are actually the conditions under a democratic government. So anybody who's out there saying, I can't see the point of this, I understand it. I just explained the conditions under a democratic government. I understand what it feels like to say, well, if this is true, then what's the point? These nations are going to do what they do and move how they move, but who you are while you're here and what you do while you're on this planet, that matters. And that says something about you. It says something about us. So rather than throw our hands up and say, this is too much to take somebody's hand in one and the other say, I can keep this up. Because who's going to fight alongside Sonya Massey's father? It can't just be Ben Crump. It really can't. His catchy one-liners are simply not enough anymore, right? A Democratic Party is easier for us to leverage the rights that we've won. Nothing was ever given in this country, but we leverage the rights that were won, that were hard fought and hard won. And use that, because in the meantime, while we're sitting here debating whether or not America is a imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist, hetero patriarchy, people like Sonya Massey are just trying to live their lives and getting murdered for existing. That's why what you do and what I do and what we do matters now. I believe in us. I'm going to fight for her. I'm going to fight for her family, and I'm going to fight for every black person here. And I mentioned, how are these things connected? Let's not forget that American police officers and the IDF, they train together all the time. That weapons manufacturing here happens, and we are the ones that are providing the weapons to Israel to kill Palestinians. Those weapons are produced here. They're also used by our own National Guard. They're also used by our own security and defensive forces. They're used by vigilantes. So, with that, here's our call to action. We're still in this. As long as people like Netanyahu thinks that they can just walk up in Congress and say what they want to say, as long as officers like this can go and work anywhere in America, our work's not yet done. So, this was a tough one. I'm sending mad love out to y'all. I know this is heavy, but I'm telling you, as long as our people fight, I haven't seen one Palestinian say, I give up. Not one. I've not seen one black person say, well, I guess that's it for us then. No. This is why we're here. And we have everything we need to see this work through. Sending so much love out to y'all. We're going to be fine. We just got to keep up the fight. Every time we fight, we win. So with that, let's hit that question of the day.
Hi, this is Andrew from Brooklyn, and I'm really interested in the question of how political figures and movements draw on comedy to advance their aims. I'm certainly curious about how this works in efforts to promote democracy. I'm also interested in how that works for other types of politics, like authoritarianism or maybe even fascism. Maybe this is related to punching up versus punching down. Maybe it's a different kind of framework altogether. But yes, would love to hear your responses.
Dope. If I'm understanding the question, it's how comedy and politics kind of work to inform our cultural and political understandings. I got into comedy because I think that they work hand in hand. All comedy, the best kind of comedy, the important kind of comedy, is a reflection of society, and it's an artistic expression. And there's only two kinds of art. There's the kind of art that maintains the status quo and the kind of art that challenges it, right? The best kind of comedy challenges the status quo. That could be as simple as making fun of the way that I know for a fact that straight couples are, when they hit that sort of low in the relationship, one of them is going to write their real estate exam or do a marathon. It's guaranteed. It's definitely going to happen, right? So it could be as simple as that, or it's looking at the systems of power and translating them and translating the feelings of common people. And I think what we've seen in this like hyper polarizing political moment is people are, I'm going to just say it, I've seen a lot of comedians who used to be amazing hit a wall, and because they and mostly men, because they weren't immediately loved and cherished in the way that they felt like they should have been, or the way that they were like 10, 15 years ago, they're doing anything they can and saying anything they can to try to be like edgy. And edgy at this point is talking about trans people. Edgy at this point is talking about queer people. But specifically trans people. And it always makes me laugh because trans people make up less than 1% of the population here in the United States. I've mentioned this, you heard me mention this a million times. So annoying. Oh my God, yes. But like literally has nothing to do with any of the systemic issues that make life difficult. Has nothing to do with the ways that children are being treated in this country, but the right conflated the two. So tell me, what kind of comedian, how good are you really if you're taking somebody else's talking point, right, from some like batshit corners of the internet and then treating it like it's real? I'm like, can y'all stop? Like, it's like these dudes literally stop reading when they're 38 years old. That's just, they never pick up a book again in their lives. That's it. So I think that the best kind of comedy challenges the status quo. I don't believe that anything is off limits. I want to be really clear. I've never heard a funny rape joke in my life. And even then, I'm now seeing that there's stories where women who have experienced sexualized violence are telling their stories on the comedic stage. And I think that to me is something that I think could be really wonderful and profound for them and for comedy. But don't ever, ever, ever think for a moment that being edgy is being a comedian. Being edgy is boring. Being edgy is not interesting. You know what's punk? Punching up at power. You know what's punk? Making fun of billionaires. You know what's punk? I don't know. Writing and telling the kind of jokes and being in community with the kind of people that, I don't know, fascists and bigots hate. That's comedy. So I think I got into this because I decided I didn't want to be on the outside of the conversation. So I got into the comedy world and onto the stage. And I believe that we could take it further than any of this like old era comics. The new gen comedians are coming in and they're honestly fire. I'm really excited about it. But don't have don't be buying into the bull. You know, these hoes are out here just peddling the same kinds of bigoted nonsense under the umbrella term edgy, and I'm like, it's sad to me. It's like the worst kind of porn. Like, I'm not interested in it. Give us a laugh, right? Not a tickle. So with that, I just want to say mad love to y'all, and let's hit it. So shout out to y'all. Just thank you so much for listening to Landline. It means the world to us. The show really is a labor of love. Find us on Apple, find us on Spotify and all major streaming platforms. Drop us a voice note with your questions at landline with jfk@gmail.com. I want to hear from you. Shout out to KR and the landline team, and shout out to you, the listeners, that make it all possible.